contact this freelance editor. Her name's Jane Harrigan, and she's a BC alum from, I don't know, 1970 something. I don't want to give her too many years. I don't know exactly when she graduated, but we started working. She said, I think you have something here, but you really got to just start, kind of start over. And so I guess, a few years later, fast forward, the rest is history. So without her, this would never be possible. She's out on the West Coast, so she couldn't be here, but just wanted to, so this really strong BC connection when I think about this book and the journey. As far as the book itself, people sometimes ask, are those my hands? They are not. Evidently my hands do not make the cut for a book, so it may be more sort of like, what's wrong with my hands? But nonetheless. All right, so any discussion about race in medicine, which we're going to talk about today, kind of has to really start by talking about race in a larger society, in a larger context. So we're going to just sort of begin with that before we sort of delve into the specifics of race in medicine in my own journey. So here's a quote from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So when we think about our history in America, sometimes it often seems that in many ways we really never face these discussions. So in recent years, things have come up with topics about blackface or about Confederate monuments, and it seems as if the discussion is occurring anew, like for the first time when people are having this conversation, even though this is something that has been going on for a long time. And in some ways, when I think about that, I think about this quote from Baldwin, that in some ways, the larger discussion has really never been faced in some ways. Baldwin and other writers have talked about race in the language of medicine, using medical metaphors. Race being described as a poorly healing wound, or a virus, or a cancer that attacks us from within. That's often been described in that way when we think about our history. Race has also kind of naturally infiltrated the medical world. This is something I find interesting. So oftentimes in medicine, there's a sense that we ace organic chemistry or physics. Or there are a few folks in the room, probably some, orgo and physics and calculus, and somehow that makes us, sort of insulates us or inoculates us from what's happening in the outside world. We're smart, we're bright, we're not, racism is for people who are stupid, or, there's all these sorts of things that people will say, think. But history kind of tells us something different. So that photo on the left is an infamous photo. It's from a physician who was involved in the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. I'm sure some of you, many of you probably have heard something about that history. I mean, it's one of just, in some ways it's the most famous example, but it's really much of an example of a larger history of abuse occurring at the hands of black bodies. So that particular study occurred in the 1930s, started in 1932, and progressed through 1972. And then the aim of the study was to study the natural history of syphilis. So the men involved were sort of brought there under the guise that they were getting free medical care, even though they were actually being monitored and studied to see how syphilis would progress in these men. Never really had syphilis. They never told they had syphilis, so there's a risk of them transmitting it to other people, of course. And then in 1947, penicillin was available. So for 25 years of the study, a curative treatment was available, but was never offered to these men who didn't know they had the disease. All in the guise of sort of studying what the natural history of the disorder would be. So 1972 is when it ended. And it only ended because there was and there were actually, there were publications being, about this experiment. And what's fascinating about, if you sort of go back into the record of history, there were a few doctors who said, this is awful, you can't really be doing this. And mainstream medical journals were publishing results from this. It wasn't until actually the popular media got a hold of it. It was like a Washington Examiner, I think in 1972, someone leaked this story to the press. And then the next day it was on the front page of the New York Times. And suddenly the study was over. So who knows how much longer it would actually last, so think about that. But of course, think about the history of the country at the time this experiment was happening, right? 1930s through the 70s, we're talking about Jim Crow era, right? And so the larger context of society was influencing the world of medicine. The photo on the right has sort of been something that was, happened more recently, of course. That's the whole controversy about Governor Northam. You guys all familiar with that, the Governor of Virginia and the yearbook photo, and whether he was the guy on the right or not, the blackface or in the KKK robe. My first thought when I saw that was not really about that. I think that's sort of beside the point. People, because when you talk about race and racism, people, I think all too often focus on individuals, and then it becomes an issue, well, people will say, well, Governor North was a racist or a bad person. And then people say, no, he's not. He's a good person. He did this, did this, did that. And it becomes this dialogue about whether he's good or bad. And that really misses the whole point. Because when you think about this, my first thought was, wow, this is a medical school yearbook. 1984, it was in part of Virginia that's 40% African American. Now he's in the photo, but then someone also took, whether he is or not, doesn't matter. Somebody took this photo. It also then went through the layer of a medical school yearbook, so people saw the photo, felt that was somehow okay. Other people higher up in the administration did saw the photo, and still it's going through these different layers and people know and sort of get taken like, wow, this is crazy, you can't do this, right? And this is in a community of 40% African American. So my first thought was like, what might that have meant for the patients who were under the care of the people in that setting at the time? I think one thing that's even more egregious about this yearbook is that we see this photo because he's famous, he's the governor of a state. But there are actually other photos in there that were far more troublesome. There was a photo there of a professor at the medical school, and he has a mug, and he's smiling into the camera, and it says something about to the effect of, there's more work to do today, there's still more slaves to be sold. And it's like he's smiling with this coffee mug. Again, think about the layer. There's someone that has a photo, someone takes that, someone prints that, and then all these layers in which people are sort of seeing this and no one is acting, right? So again, this is my thought, is like, what does that mean for the people in that community at that time and place? So again, the idea that the outside world doesn't influence people because they do well on Oregon Kim is absurd. But often you hear people in medicine sort of use that as a defense, that they're really smart and they're somehow insulated from these larger problems. And that is, I would challenge it, that is nothing to be further from true. So bringing it more specifically to medicine, this is a quote from Dr. King. Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane. So this is from 1966. So this is at the sort of the end of the Civil Rights Movement, as we sort of formally discussed it, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act that passed, all those sorts of things. At the time that Dr. King made this statement, think about the states that he's associated with historically: Alabama, Georgia, missed one for some reason, Mississippi. The life expectancy among African American men and white men during this period of time in the mid-60s was about 9 years. So almost a full decade. The life expectancy difference among black women and white women during that era was about 7.5 years. So really stark. So in the intervening 50 years or so, there's been considerable progress, but think about the context in which he's making this statement. So he's saying that, we have all these things we're trying to get. We're trying to get voting rights, we're trying to get access to public accommodations, but the most important thing is health and life itself, right? And there's this drastic disparity. Places like Duke in 1960, in early 60s were formerly segregated. I mean, completely segregated, right? So there's a whole history of disparity, a whole history of racism and segregation that led to the disparities that we saw, that Dr. King saw. So my own personal journey began 30 years later. So I started med school in 1996. Years go by fast. That's not that long ago. You wake up one day and you're 45 years old, and you're like, what happened? So I started med school in 1996, and it was 30 years after Dr. King's remarks. And I came from a community that was, we'll talk more about this later, all African American, lower middle class, working class. And when I got to a place like Duke, it was a very different kind of experience. People there were very much more affluent, privileged sort of backgrounds. But I entered medical school with this hope and this sort of aspiration that medicine would kind of be a way to transcend race in some ways. I mean, I was obviously aware of all the differences and all the ways in which racism impacted life, but I saw medicine as sort of like, well, I want to be a surgeon or a cardiologist, and everyone's, heart's a heart, blood vessel's a blood vessel. So I sort of had that kind of aspiration. But when you get to med school, when I got to med school, it was pretty clear that race was going to be something that I couldn't avoid. So as we learned about one disease after another, they all sort of followed the same form. It started with the biomedical kind of discussion about disease, and then it would always finish with the demographics. And who is affected more by the disease? Young versus old, men versus women. And it would always end with race and ethnicity. It would always end that way. It would always be black versus white. Now we know that's, what does that exclude? A quarter of the population, maybe more. But that was sort of the way in which it was always framed. Black versus white, black versus white. And it seemed that no matter what the disease, it would always sort of be the same frame. This disease is more common among black people. Or black people who get this disease do worse. Or both. Over and over and over again. It's like I could predict what they were going to say before they said it. And it was always framed in this way that was sort of like a genetic or biological determinants, like it was your destiny. This is just the way it was, and there was nothing that could be done. And so, as I was listening to that, several questions would go through my mind. And this is sort of the thing that I internalized, right? That being black was somehow bad for your health, and it was a risk factor for being sick. But again, the question is why? What could be done? And this notion of race, the way they were framing it, was it biology, as it seemed like professors were framing it, or was it something else? Was it about social factors and things of that sort? So for me, this had a much more personal meaning than just that. So this is a photo of my maternal grandmother, really the only grandmother that I knew. So those of you familiar with that book about Human Lax, The Moral Life of Human Lax, I'm sure many of you probably read that or seen this movie as well. So my grandmother grew up in that very same part of Virginia, so about 3-4 miles away from where Human Lax, where that story is set. The same time period, they're about the same age. And so she made her way to Washington, D.C., and as a young woman, worked as a housekeeper, raised my mom and 2 other children as a single mother. And so growing up, I'd go to church, or I would take me to church, I'd fight it, but I'd go to church with my mom, and afterwards we go see my grandmother. She lived in New York City, D.C. And sometimes they talk about her blood pressure. And my grandmother had really interesting theories about doctors. She felt like doctors wanted to just kind of keep you sick so that you could keep going to them and take all your money. And so she had and that's a thing that a lot of patients have even to this day. But so she had that sort of built-in kind of distrust of the whole medical establishment. But they talk about her high blood pressure. And then when I got to college, towards the end of college, and I was beginning to think about going to medical school, my grandmother suffered a stroke. So the first stroke she was able to recover from pretty well, but then she had another stroke. And from that point, she was never the same, physically or mentally. And then during my first year of medical school, she developed heart failure. And so right when I was going to my very first day of gross anatomy lab, which is a big moment in the medical school life, I got a call that my grandmother died and had to go home. And so when you think about those diseases she had, high blood pressure, stroke, heart failure, all more common among African Americans and all with the worst course among African Americans and kids. So that narrative in the classroom, again, had a very personal meaning to me. It hit home even closer a few months later. So this is me around the time when I was around your guys' age. So I didn't like taking pictures during that period of my life. And I looked long and hard for a picture of me with this smiling faces like I see out in the audience. And this is the best I could do. So that speaks volumes, right? So about 6 months after my grandmother died, as a medical student, began to sort of learn the clinical skills of doctors. You learn how to measure blood pressure, you learn how to draw blood, you learn how to put in IVs, those sorts of things. And you start by practicing on one another. That's his own sort of fun story. But as we were doing that one day, class day measured my blood pressure and it was high. And our first reaction is to think that we're all novices, inexperienced. She doesn't know what she's doing. She said, I don't know what I'm doing. And so we sort of had that kind of trying to dismiss it, right? We checked, it is high. Bring in a faculty person, the senior physician. He confirmed that it was elevated. Clearly high. I mean, you guys would probably know the numbers. 140 or 90, sort of that kind of cutoff for high. Mine was significantly over that. 150, 160, the bottom number was almost 100, so significantly over that. No, clear cut, elevated. So, wow, I'm like, geez, I'm 23 years old, I played basketball, high school, college, I'm physically fit, and what's going on here? So I go to the student health center a little while later, they draw some blood, urine samples, sort of standard stuff you would do in this situation. And the doctors found I had some protein in the urine, and one of the numbers was off, and there was this concern about kidney-related problems, which is a well-known complication of high blood pressure, which is more common among African Americans and has a worse course. So in some ways, that just seemed like a ton of bricks. Here I am learning about all these things in the classroom, and now it's happening to me. It's almost like I was fulfilling that this is my destiny in some way, right? This is the destiny of the black people, but this is also my own personal destiny. So like, how do I solve this? How do I get out of this? What is this all about? And so that's where it kind of became this sort of thing that sort of consumed me in many ways. So that's sort of the journey that I began as the first year medical student that kind of leads me up till today. So eventually, when you're in the classroom, eventually you get out into the real world in medical school. You start to work in hospitals and clinics, and you start to see people in the real world. And as I started to see that, I began to realize that less and less of this seemed to be about biology, and much more of this seemed to be about social and economic factors that people found themselves in, and this was really dictating health. So there's one story, it's a whole chapter book where I describe my experiences in this small town in North Carolina. And so the whole situation here was that this is a small town about 90 minutes east of Duke. So when you're in Durham, Chapel Hill, some of you may be familiar with that area, Durham, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, the Triangle, it's, you know, a lot of educated people, well-to-do people, nice houses, progressive, all that sorts of things. And then as you sort of go, you start on the highway and you start to drive out east to the eastern part of North Carolina, it starts to feel like you're going back in time. And so you get back to 3-lane highway, you go to 2-lane highway, oh, I feel like I'm back 20 years. And then eventually you get in this 1-lane road and you feel like you're in the 50s. And so in the clinic where we were in, it was a town, and it had a proverbial railroad track, black side, white side. It was really, it seemed like, can this really be true? It almost seemed like something out of a bad story, but it was the way it really was. And then we got to this clinic, which was on the black side of town, and in front of a cotton field of all things. So they had all this sort of imagery of years past. And Duke had this relationship with this clinic, or this town, where once a month we'd go out there and we would deliver care the best we could under sort of far from ideal circumstances, because the town had no doctors. The white people in town would often go to another neighboring town and get medical care, but the black people in town, who were often in. And so people just sort of line up, first come, first serve, and it's just sort of like, this is the sort of care and you're getting care mostly by medical students who are not as experienced. But of course, from our side, it was a great opportunity to learn medicine and to try and sort of see what it was like in the real world. So this is actually kind of a restored version of the clinic. It was actually like a one-room house, had a hole in the floor. I mean, this is the sort of the world. This is the kind of care people we're getting in this setting in which we're getting it. And I was struck by this one case. There's several people I described in the story, but there was this one woman in the book at the very end I described that I saw, and she was the last person we saw that day. And I was just struck by the idea that she came in with heavy bleeding from her menstrual cycles, which is fibroids as a cause, very common, very treatable disorder. And she also had really high blood pressure, very high blood pressure. But both very treatable problems. At Duke, we would have said, okay, we can take care of this, no problem. Boom, boom, we do this, we do that, we gotta take care of it. But here, 90 minutes away, it's like we suddenly can't do anything. And I remember at the very end of the session, the preceptor, which was the supervisor, was telling me the issue is she doesn't have health insurance. So she has a full-time job, she's doing, she's trying to do all things the right way, but no health insurance, can't get care, no doctors around this area. The only way she can get care is if her condition worsens, and then she can get emergency care. And so I just thought how perverse of a system would be that a person has a preventable health problem, but has to get sicker to get medical care. And it was something that just really kind of struck me in a very real way. And you can read about that in a textbook, you can know that in some abstract way, but to actually see a real person that this is affecting, it was something that really kind of stuck with me and made me really sort of recommit myself to thinking about what can I do to address this larger problem. So I've been talking so far mostly about the experience of sort of like the social and economic forces that are influencing health. But then there's also the role of the medical profession itself. What are doctors? How are doctors part of this? How are we complicit? And so there's a couple interesting things I want to sort of talk about with these next few slides. So these are two books. Some of you may be familiar with some of these books. These are books that talk about the role of race in medicine. The one on the left, Medical Apartheid, it's really more about the experiment, the research realm. It says that it's the dark history of medical experimentation on Black Americans from colonial times to the present. So it's really sort of digging back to the very beginning and from slavery. And so if you really sort of dig back, sometimes it's kind of painful because you sort of see how so many of the medical advances kind of occurred at the hands of sort of slaves and people in the Jim Crow era, people who really couldn't consent to the treatment. The book on the right is called Black and Blue. It's more about the medical profession itself. This author one on the left is a journalist, the one on the right is an academician at the University of Texas, an English professor, actually. But he sort of has uncovered a treasure trove of like articles from leading medical journals in the early 20th century, and just the ways in which doctors are described, the ways in which patients are described by doctors, it's pretty harrowing to sort of read and see. And even as recently as like the 1960s, you'll see in leading medical journals like the New England Journal and JAMA, there were these leading doctors from Boston. I'm not sure what hospital or medical school they were affiliated with. They were from Boston. And this is during a period when there was, after Dr. King's assassination, there were a lot of sort of urban unrest, a lot of across all cities and many cities in America. And so this doctor, their theory was that this was really, their whole thesis was to minimize the role of social factors in poverty and racism and all that. And their whole thesis was that this was due to organic brain disease. And that and this is leading medical journal, this is what they're writing about, this is what you see. The doctor's saying that this is really all about organic brain disease. That's why we're having these problems in our society. So that's some of the kind of history recently in the 1960s. So when I started to write a book about myself about race and medicine, I wanted to know what did other doctors think about it. So this is a photo of David Satcher, who was a Surgeon General, that's the sort of Surgeon General we had under Bill Clinton. So this article is in 1973, and this is probably the first thing I was able to find where a doctor really talked about candidly what was happening in the real world with black patients at the hands of the healthcare system. So this is just something that's sort of like a historical treasure in a way, because it's the first time that someone's really sort of beginning to talk about it. You fast forward a few years later, this is another interesting article that white doctors and black patients influence the race of the doctor-patient relationship. So I couldn't find a photo of actually Dr. Levy from the Mississippi, so I just found two other photos which I thought were pretty interesting because it sort of puts the historical things into context. I want to push the light, but I'm afraid I might do something bad. So the person on the top is actually Aaron Shirley. He's actually the first black person to attend or work at the University of Mississippi. This is the mid-1960s. And below him is a guy named Dr. Blair Batson, who was the chair of the department at the time. So it's just for those who are interested in the history of medicine and race, it's a fascinating sort of story and journey about the sacrifices that the person about Dr. Batson had to make to get Dr. Shirley on staff at the University of Mississippi. But as you can imagine, the author of this article talks about the history of race in Mississippi and also about some of the challenges that black patients face in a very candid way. And it's so much of it is just so relevant. You read it and it feels like it can be written just now, right now. It's like so much of it is still so relevant. So you think about 1973, 1985. So about 11 years later, another doctor sort of takes up this cause. So history's passing, right? It's like people are talking about this as if it's something kind of new, but what it's showing is that things are kind of still persisting in a real problematic way. So this is also a really sort of well-known article on the subject as well. But there are lingering problems even to this day. So this is a study that came out last year, 2018. It was from the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And the authors looked at the ways in which the medical chart itself is a form of bias and perpetuates bias. So when we think about that, think about a medical chart. So most of you have been to a doctor at some point, right? And you share your story, and then the doctor is then sort of interpreting whatever you're saying, what you're writing, and writing it down in a medical record. And so what this study is looking at is in the ways in which people write that information could influence the subsequent care that people actually receive. And so what they did in this particular study is they looked at people, so they actually got real records from the emergency room at Johns Hopkins of people with sickle cell anemia, primarily affects African American people, and they looked at the ways in which people were described in that. And they sort of put, and this is one scenario. So they put that scenario, this is a person, they describe him a certain way, and then they try to sort of sanitize the language in case B. And so it's like there's the real language and there's the sort of sanitized language. And then they gave that information to a group of doctors to sort of see what kind of treatment recommendations would you make based on this information. And what they discovered, the descriptions were just kind of bizarre. Like there were details that were included that had nothing to do with the medical care at all. What they found is that people were much less likely to provide the appropriate medical treatment for people that were described a certain way. Because what was happening is that you had a story in mind, and this is something they teach us in medical school. You have a story in mind, and you start with the described person in a certain way, and then it leads you to a certain conclusion. So what was happening is that people were being described in a sort of derogatory way, and the conclusion was that this person wasn't essentially worthy of a certain treatment, or wasn't worthy of treatment for pain, or whatever may be the case. And so it was a really kind of a fascinating story. If we have more time, I'll try and explain it in a little bit more clear way. But the larger point then is that when I teach it to medical students, I always try to tell them, or young doctors, that your words have tremendous power. And so, why are you putting on the chart? Like I'll see something on the chart, like why is that in there? How does that relate to what the person came in for? How does it relate to their treatment? What are you trying to accomplish in saying that? And sometimes people sort of put on notice, or they're sort of taken aback, because they're not really sure. And this is the ways in which your own bias and how you describe people can influence the person's care. This is also interesting because that journal is Neurology. This happened just last month. So this journal had to actually retract an article. I thought it was really interesting. It was really fascinating. So there was an article written by a doctor describing an experience he had with a patient who had a neurological disorder and eventually was seeking care from an alternative medicine practitioner. So that could be really a fascinating discussion about conventional medicine versus complementary medicine, and it could have been a really interesting discussion. But this author just started inserting his bias in ways that are extremely problematic, because the article is about this interaction with a black male patient, and then he starts describing several junctions about black women he describes the person's wife as really overweight, and he describes it in very sort of derogatory terms, and he starts bringing other black women he describes in ways that seem to have nothing to do with the actual central character of the patient. And again, we go back to this idea. So it didn't cause an outrage among the medical community. The paper got retracted. But once again, we went back to this idea is people started to defend the doctor. Well, he's a good doctor, he's done this. We go back to this idea of an individual person being good or bad. I was struck again by the idea that all the layers of people who saw this article and it still saw the light of day. Because I was thinking, gee, if I would have been in the room and I'd seen an article, I would have said, you can't put this out there, because this is going to happen. It seems so predictable. But again, it goes back to the point that these are not individual issues, this is much more of a larger kind of systematic issue. So that's sort of hot off the press. So far I've just mostly talked about the stories of black patients and health disparities, but the big part of my own journey is what is it like to be an African American male in the medical world and sort of navigating that journey. And that's the sort of the other theme that I sort of talk about in the book. So I kind of characterize it as the good, the bad, and the awkward. Because when you take a starting point, when someone sees me, so I'm black male, come from a lower income background, I'm 6'6". Being a doctor is probably not the first thing that most people are going to think when they see me. That's just the, that's the honest. There's so many narratives in our society that shape people in so many ways. That's going to be often the last thing someone might think. So on a good day, they might think that I'm a basketball player, right? You're a pretty good basketball player because you're tall. And that would be a good day for me as far as perceptions. And so, I did play basketball, but the truth is that if I had to rely on my jump shot and ball handling skills to feed me, I'd be in trouble right now because it was not great. That's good, but oftentimes things are much more not so good, right? So there's a story that didn't make it into the book, which was me as a young medical student, first-year medical student, driving home from North Carolina back up to Maryland, and so just like a weekend or something like that, and getting pulled over. I got pulled over by a police officer, and it was, and this is not a story to sort of bash police officers. I'm a psychiatrist. I work with police officers all the time. That's not the point of the story. But what happened is that I got pulled over, and for speeding, which I think I was speeding, but what are you gonna see in that situation, right? The thing that struck me was I get pulled over, and then the first thing the officer said when he pulls me over, this is rural North Carolina. He said, boy, do you have gun or drugs on you? And so I thought to myself, at this point I started to panic. So I'm thinking, like, what happened here? Like, how do we get from this to that? And then I just remember this scene to me, like, I just remember this image where I had shorts and a shirt, I'm driving home, going to see my parents, and searching frantically in my car for my medical school ID badge, as if that was somehow inoculating me from what I thought was about to happen. And I was just like, where is it? No, you have all this wrong kind of thing. I never held a gun in my hand in my life, never did any kind of drugs. How could that be the first thing that you see me and think about? And this is someone in a position of power, right, who has this sort of feeling about me. So it was a really sort of frightening experience. And it just kind of reminded me, here I've gotten to Duke, I'm this, big, medical student, going to be a doctor, but how quickly that could sort of just go away, and I could just sort of, be that scary, big, tall, scary person that would happen. So that was a sort of really powerful experience for me personally. Now in the medical world, several things also happen. Because I went to medical school thinking, I just want to be a medical student like anyone else. I want to just kind of fit in, not make waves. But I was sort of constantly reminded that I was different, and I had to sort of learn how to deal with that. And so the book opens with that story where me in the first year in the classroom, leaving the classroom, coming back in, and being told by a friend by a professor, saying, "Are you ready to fix the lights?" Right? The very first thing he says is that. And so I'm looking around. I'm not the person who's looking to cause conflict. Anyone knows me, that's not me. But then I'm looking around and thinking, it must be someone else. Why me? Why are you thinking this sort of thing? And then I said, no, I think we got this. This is not what I'm here for. And then he said, well, why? Why are you here? And there was still this very antagonistic sense that I did not physically belong in the classroom. And so that was my sort of kind of like welcome to Duke moment. And it was like 3 weeks into that first year of med school. And so, for me personally, there's all sorts of things that go through your mind. You're angry, you're upset, you're hurt, you don't know what to make of it. And I thought about, well, if I tell someone, what will they make of it? Will they think that I'm just, he's a good person? It goes back to the individual, he's a good person. You might just got on a bad day, or maybe he just innocent mistake kind of thing. And so you don't want to sort of go that route. So I just found myself, I had to kind of prove myself that I did belong, because I was already kind of feeling like I didn't in many ways. And so I just studied, literally sort of my whole life just sort of went on hold, and everything was about studying. I had to prove to myself that I did belong. And I ended up getting like one of the highest grades in the class. And so, but in this, each course, you had to like meet with the professor at the end. And even then, you have this sense of accomplishment, like, well, I did it, I succeeded, I proved I belong. You meet this professor, and he looks at the paper on the back in his blue book thing. This is outdated, right? He looks at the thing, and he's like, and he looks at me, he sort of frowns, and he looks at my ID badge, and he looks at the paper, the name, and there's a sense that he didn't believe that this has actually happened. And so it was just kind of this reminder that, here I am, I want to be a med student, I'm working hard, but I'm different, and I have to learn to deal with that. And so that was one sort of really kind of a powerful experience that I had. A few years later, as a young doctor, another story I tell in the book was, as a young doctor, first few weeks of being a real doctor, which is a pretty scary thing. When you sort of learn to be a doctor for the first time, it's really scary, all the responsibility you have. And one night I'm going down to the emergency room, and the nurse says, be careful before we go to see this patient. Not only that means the patient's aggressive, violent, those things happen, so you should sometimes need to be careful. But then one of my colleagues asks why, and she says, well, he doesn't want to see any N-word, people taking care of him. And so, she used the actual word, he said the actual word. And here I am, the only black person in this whole sort of group of doctors in this hospital for this whole period of months I was there. And just happened to show up on the one night that I'm on duty. So a lot of karma sort of things, I guess. And again, it was just this sort of powerful reminder of being different and having to sort of kind of navigate that experience. So those are some of the things that sort of informed my experiences in training. There's many things that were good. There were many times where a patient would say, I've come to Duke for 30 years. It's the first time I've seen a black doctor. It feels so good to know that this is, the work that we did, or some elderly black people who were involved in civil rights. It's so good to see someone in this position. A lot of those kinds of things as well. Or it's so good to see a brother in a white coat, as people would say. So there are all kinds of experiences that kind of informed my experience there. There's also things that are sort of awkward, because I'm someone who tries to give people the benefit of the doubt. There are times when people getting back to the basketball thing, so it comes a lot, but particularly you do, right? And so one time at the hospital, an elderly woman was there with her husband, and she was really seemed really concerned and distressed, and I said, are you okay? Because her husband was actually doing pretty well health-wise, medically. She said, I'm just really worried about you, doctor. No, I'm worried about you, sir. I said, why is that? She said, well, it's like, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. How are you gonna be with us working here? And how are you gonna get to practice in the morning? And how are you gonna, so it was this idea, she thought I was there on a basketball scholarship, but just sort of moonlighting as pretending to be a doctor. And it was almost like this idea, I thought about it as me being a Clark Kent doctor, and then I could take off my white coat and have a basketball jersey underneath. I learned to sort of kind of roll with that. But then there were times when things were not so pleasant. And one time a patient said something to the effect of, a black person, he said a black with long arms and legs shown to play basketball, and you really shouldn't be here, and you're wasting your time. His daughter turned beet red and started cursing out, so I was thankful she did it, so I didn't have to. But one of the things about that, people ask me a lot, is how do you deal with those sort of responses? And so I think for many years, I internalized a lot of that, it made me angry, I get upset, I want to lash out. But what I've sort of come to a place, I think that had a lot to do with some of the health problems I experienced, the high blood pressure. I think that I've come to a place where I realize that if I allow people that I've just met for the first time and say something off key, whatever, to really totally affect me mentally, then in some ways that person is won, and in some ways I've lost, and I've allowed them to control kind of my mental well-being and state, and I don't want to give someone that kind of control. So I'm much more easily to brush things off and say, well, that person, maybe they're just, this is what they know, this is the best they can do, or maybe that person's just a jerk, and I can just move on. So it's something that's a process that took me a long time to come to. Another complication or difficult challenge of being a black doctor was, for me personally, coming from the background I came from, was this notion of being in two different worlds, occupying two worlds. So again, I came from a lower income black community. Many of the patients I would see were very similar to people in my own life, cousin, uncle, but yet I've become part of this medical world. People are, where it's a very different world, and where do I fit in? And so it's often this feeling of sort of having to fit in one world, both worlds not being grounded in either. And that was a constant kind of narrative. And this is a photo of W.B. Du Bois, famous African-American philosopher, writer, coined that term double consciousness, this idea of always sort of seeing yourself in these two different worlds simultaneously. It's about more than the socioeconomic status. Like I learned about the socioeconomic status part, so I kind of already alluded to this. But this is a very interesting study that was done. I briefly mentioned in the book. So, Meharry Medical College is a school in Nashville, Tennessee. And so before the 1970s, basically 90% of black doctors in the United States were educated at either Meharry or Howard. Pretty much those are the only two places that people went to medical school. So the researchers there at Meharry, back in the 50s, decided to sort of collaborate with the researchers from Johns Hopkins. On the right, that's Johns Hopkins. And so this is another interesting point, is that back in those days, med school was basically all men. That's an entirely different story, and now it's changed dramatically. But so basically what this study was doing was comparing black men from Meharry Medical College from white men at Johns Hopkins. And they sort of followed them from the time they were medical students until they were middle-aged. And they found dramatic health differences over time between these two groups of doctors. So you can say that, you know, they're all doctors, they're all sort of well-to-do, but there's dramatically different health outcomes. And so why is that, right? It can't necessarily just be about money and social status, it's about a lot of other factors, so much I described, the idea of like, what do you have to deal with once you're there to sort of still continue forward. And so this study really kind of puts numbers and things to that sort of phenomenon. A couple of slides here. 13% of the US population is African American, less than 4% of practicing doctors are African American. This is interesting because you see this is a bar graph, you see several cities. I'll just walk over so it's easier to point to. So national average is on the right, 13%. And then you see several cities here, right? Even here in New York and Boston, it's about double the national average. And as you move further left, large African-American populations, these cities are all homes to very prominent, prestigious medical centers, hospitals, medical schools. And so as you travel throughout the country, as I've traveled, you see that there's sort of the same story that perpetuates itself. People are in these the medical staff in these communities are often serving largely black populations where there's a historical tension between the communities and the place where young doctors have been trained. And so it's sort of a narrative that plays out over and over again. So for me, practically, what happened, Durham is 39%. It's like, when I was in psychiatry and training, I was the only black doctor in our program. At the clinic, we served 45% African-American patients. And in that very first month, I had double the patients of everyone else there because there were all these sort of requests. Some initially by patients, some by the staff, saying, well, you're the person who needs to see this person. And again, you remind them of being different and having to sort of take on additional responsibilities as a result. So that's one of those sort of complicated factors there. So how do we sort of, laid out all these challenges and problems, how do we move forward, right? This is one of these sort of word clouds that really kind of illustrates all the intersecting factors. So some people see this as discouraging, but in some ways it's also a sense of hope because it shows me that there's so many different ways that you guys can be part of the solution. You don't have to go to medical school to be part of it. There's so many issues that are happening. There's so many ways to be part of the solution. There's so many ways. What is the world of medicine doing? So I wanted to highlight 3 people that over the last 4 years, I've traveled to probably every corner of the US, essentially 50, 60, I came maybe 100 schools, I have no idea how many, honestly. Maybe one day I'll actually go back and count. I met people in different places who are actually doing things I think are really interesting. So when I was a medical student, we had 1 hour of a discussion about race. 1 hour for the 4 years. And it was terrible. It was like some really old stereotype video. I mean, it was I can't even begin to describe how ridiculous it was. But it was like that 1 hour, and they had checked off that box, and they were done. And that was it. 4 years. So that's starting to change a lot of places. So the woman on the left is at the University of Chicago, and they're really the pioneers here. So they actually started a program at their medical school that is required. It's a year-long course where medical students have to actually, this whole curriculum is a whole year-long curriculum talking about race, disparities, all sorts of things, about all sorts of aspects. They go out into the community where people actually are. One of the things about medicine I think we sometimes lose sight of is that when we see someone in an emergency room or hospital, we are seeing that person maybe at the worst moment that they've had in their entire life. Or whatever is in their environment has happened is leading them to that moment right then and there. And then we're generalizing about that whole person and community based on that one encounter in time. So we're not seeing people out in the community when they're thriving, we're only seeing them when they're at their worst. And so that's something that needs to change, and it's beginning to change. And this is part of what she's been doing at the University of Chicago. So they go out into the community, see people when they're not sick. What are the strengths of the community? And so I think it's a great program. The person in the middle is actually, so Duke I mentioned that one had 1 hour of training when I was a student. Well, that's changed. So now Duke has a required year-long curriculum. The gentleman in the middle is the one who organized that. It's also expanding to the second year, so it's now going to be a 2-year project where, again, similar model to after the University of Chicago program. The woman on the right is a pediatrician at the Children's National in Washington, D.C., similar model as well. So there's several programs popping up throughout the country. And the thing I like about the one on the right is she also has the students and trainees getting involved with the realm of policy. So they're actually doing formal training in health policy and how can we actually become part of the solution beyond just being doctors in the clinical sense. So there really are seeds of change. And that brings, and that brings me to the, oh my goodness, what did I do? I always do that. This brings me to the future. So this is a group of medical students in New York that was taken some time ago where they were organizing about how can they leverage their medical education to change the system for a better, for the better. So when I was a medical student in the 1990s, these sort of topics were really not on the table. So I remember many discussions where people would say things like, in a very condescending way, I went to medical school to be a doctor, not a social worker. I don't have time for this garbage, and these things people would say. It was very dismissive, very condescending. If it's not about medicine, all this other stuff is really not important. It's extremely important, right? But that was sort of the narrative. And the students went to med school with a very different mindset. I remember there was an election, and I don't want to get too deep into politics, but there was an election, 96, North Carolina. It was pretty stark. One guy who was running was basically unapologetic racist. He even sort of said, he was the one who sort of filibustered the King holiday. And one time on a radio interview, he said, someone said, "Thank you for holding what you've done to sort of keep the black man down." And he said, "You're welcome." So it wasn't like he was, wasn't trying to hide it. It was out there. The guy he was running against was African American. He was the first person to integrate Clemson University. He's the mayor of Charlotte. It was pretty stark, right? It's pretty stark differences there, to say the least. And I remember having a discussion among students. There was one student, she was really ahead of her time. She was like, we really got to get out and organize, all this sort of stuff. And everyone was just looking at her like she was crazy. And they were like, we're in med school, we don't have time for this. Like, what are you talking about? Now, that's extremely different. So I go to medical schools now, I see students who've gone to medical school with the intent of trying to help change society. That was so different. So that's a real great hope for inspiration. I feel like that's going to be the real thing that will begin to really change how medicine relates to these issues in the long term. I think as people, I hate to say as my generation ages out, but I think that's kind of what will need to ultimately happen. I think that the change really will happen, because I know that even when we were young, we didn't have that disposition. So I'm really encouraged as I see people out in the community. So I want to leave you with this one quote, another quote from Dr. King. Then we'll go to discussion. If I can do this, I always say this promise. There you go. If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way. So the thing I like about this quote is that, a lot of times we can get discouraged by all the many things that seem to be happening. What can we do? It's so powerful. There's so many things that we seem to sort of feel helpless and throw up our hands. And it's a tendency that I felt and many others have felt at different times. But I think sometimes we lose sight of our role and the power that we have as individuals to really influence people in ways that we sometimes don't even know. So if you think about me as an 8th grader, so I was 14 years old. I was in a middle school that was be considered local forming. 90% African American. Very few people on a trajectory to go to college. Very few. Unless, and honestly, someone even candidly told me one time, well, it's not candid, it's actually unfortunate. He told me, he looked at me and said, the only way you're going to get to college is if you work on your jump shot. That was sort of like, that sort of, those are the expectations that people had for people in their school, which is terrible in itself. That's an entirely different issue. But so that was the kind of school I went to. But in 8th grade, I was always a kid who had to think for kind of numbers. I was like read sports, kind of a nerd for like baseball stats and that kind of thing. So I had to think of numbers, and I did really well on the math test. And one teacher said, you should apply for this magnet program. And my first reaction, you think, well, that's a good thing, right? Great opportunity. My first reaction was to say no, because I thought, I'm not going to fit in. I'm going to be the only black person there, only one from my neighborhood there. And so a lot of times in society, people will say, people will criticize people. They'll say, well, I tried to offer you help, and you still didn't take it. You don't even know what's good for you. And you hear people say these sort of things all the time, right? And so, but here I was saying those same things because I was thinking which wouldn't work out. And so this teacher she doesn't just take that at face value. She asked me several times, I keep saying no. And she finally, one Saturday, she calls, I hear this phone call home. She calls her mom. And my mom's one of those really sort of blunt type people. And she says, she said, boy, why didn't you tell me this? You're going to take this test. You know, she's very blunt, and she was even that nice. I mean, I can't even into the mom. She's very blunt, and told me what I'm going to do. And so I take these tests, still thinking, you know, begrudgingly, thinking nothing's going to come of this. Why am I doing this? But you know, and then after I did it, I didn't think I was going to, you know, get anything from it. But about a month or so later, I got told I got into this magnet program. My mom told me I was going to go. And once I got into this program, it was like the first point in which I could sort of see a different way in which I could relate to the world. Because if you would have told me as a 14-year-old that I could have been a doctor, that would have been inconceivable. I'd never seen an African-American person who was a physician. Not until I was like 17, 18 years old. Never, inconceivable. If you would have told me that I could have written a book, inconceivable. I'd never read a book, honestly, at that point in my life. Not once. I would find ways to sort of cut corners. I'd read the introduction, and I'd get a cliff note, and I might look at the conclusion. I found all sorts of ways. I would never cover to cover, not a chance. So I didn't have to be a doctor, write books, talk to people. All this inconceivable. As a 14-year-old, inconceivable. I mean, just never would have been possible at all. But you have this one teacher. So this is a white woman. She's probably in her mid-40s at the time, and you know, she really took it upon herself to sort of push and push and push and push. And in schools like I went to, that often didn't happen a lot of times. People would sort of, you know, people push people through. They even sometimes say that you weren't going to be good. Things would happen like that. I mean, all sorts of things would happen. And here's this person that just sort of made that one sort of small little thing in the grand scheme, and how that impacted my life. So I really want you to think about, you know, so sometimes when I see patients, you know, a lot of times doctors will say, you give a person advice, they don't follow it, that person doesn't know what's good for them. But a lot of times, I learned from my own personal experience that you have to sort of push to understand where is that person coming from, what is their context, why are they thinking the way they are, what can I do to sort of reach them in this way? And these are the things, the lessons I want you to learn, because I think one thing that's really important is, as a college student, you may think that you're the bottom of the totem pole, you can't help. You never can underestimate the impact you can have on people's lives, even when it seems like you're not. Sometimes that person may not seem like they're listening that first time, but maybe they hear it, but maybe they're not in a place where they can actually act on it. But always, so never lose sight of it as you move forward. So, over the years, I've traveled quite a bit. I always love the feedback I get from people. What I enjoy most is that my story can kind of be a vehicle for other people to share their own stories and their own experiences and challenges. It doesn't not always black and white. It could be, sometimes it's been Jewish, Muslim, in both directions, or it could be women in medicine. I really value the sort of ways in which, in some ways, what I write, hopefully, in some ways, transcends just strictly the black and white discussion. There also isn't anything you guys can say that I haven't heard. I have pretty thick skin over the years, because in some ways it's like a Rorschach for America in some ways. And so you could imagine when you write about race in medicine, or race in general, you get all kinds of reactions. And so I've had some pretty horrible things said to me and written. And but 90% has been overwhelmingly positive. What I found, two things I think I want to leave you with that I think are most striking. One was many of my medical student classmates and people I trained with got back to me, and they were amazed. They were like, I can't believe this happened. Are you serious? This really happened? We were in the same class. We were in the same hospital rotation. How could you experience this? And so it was a sense that we were on the journey in some ways, but our journey was so different, and they were just totally oblivious in some ways to what was actually happening. And it was just sort of this idea of like, you know, you don't even know what some of you in the same room here, you had no idea kind of what's really happening among your peers. And it was really sort of striking to see that and think about that. The other thing that I also thought I really enjoyed, the second point, was that sometimes people, even the people who are really, sometimes we feel like conversations can't be had, divides can't be bridged. And in some cases that's true. There's some people that I think honestly can't be reached. But what I found was really amazing was that there was one guy who sent me a letter, and he said, when I first saw the cover of your book and the title, I cringed and I got really angry. So I'm thinking, well, you know, why is he reacting, right? Because that was his first reaction. And then he said, against my better judgment, I opened the book. And once I did that, I learned things that I'd never known or thought about, and it's helped me reconsider my relationship to a lot of things in this world. And I thought that was like, wow. I was like, wow. So this is someone who started off being hostile to me. And so and then it sort of gave me able to get something out of it. So I'm someone at this point now where, at first I was really reluctant to sort of bring this out, and when I first found out the book was going to get a lot of attention, I was actually pretty frightened, actually. I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Am I going to lose my job to do? What's something's going to happen? Because I was worried about the reception. But I've learned that it's an opportunity nowadays to sort of, we live in this time where there's a lot of difficulty having conversations, and I'm someone that's come to really embrace the opportunity and so to meet people where they are, and so to have those difficult conversations. And so, I encourage you. I know how hard it could be in this world to do that, but I want to sort of leave you with that as well. So I think I'll shut up. I want to get you guys questions, but I want to say thank you again for the opportunity, and to really never lose sight of the power that you do have as individuals. And those of you who become doctors, when you're a young doctor, you may think you have no power either, but those words you write on a person's chart can really change their life in ways that you haven't. You may be a frustrated doctor, but the way you see something on a person can change their future for good or for bad. So just never kind of lose sight of the power that you have as you progress in each stage of your life. So thank you.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation and for being so transparent and sharing difficult things. Why psychiatry?
Sure. So the question is why psychiatry? So I'm actually giving a second book, which will really go in much more depth about that. But I guess the short story is that I never thought I would be psychiatry when I started med school. It was the last thing I thought I would do. Ironically, I got the lowest grade in psychiatry of any rotation in medical school. I was really bad at that point. Was advised to me at the end of the rotation that I should not only not do psychiatry, I shouldn't do medicine or surgery or anything. I should just work in a lab and not see patients at all. So that's kind of how my skills were at that point. So several things happened. One is as I started to see patients, you start to see how much of mental health influences the person's physical well-being and how often it was neglected. And often not just neglected, but sort of looked down upon openly hostilely by doctors. There's often hostility towards patients that have mental health problems. They say, oh, this is just a psych patient, and we don't need to take heed of their chest pain. Or, those things would happen, and often to the patient's detriment. You would see those things happen. So there's that part. Then I had a personal connection where I had a few friends who suffered pretty significant mental health problems. One so much so that he was unable to continue and kind of went on a path that was, just kind of never really was able to bounce back. And I think that what's illustrated about that was that, I think as I was mentioning earlier, I think a lot of times in society, one of the problems we have with mental health is that we sort of see, particularly people who are really sick, people who are homeless, people who are in prison, who have really severe mental health problems, we see them as fundamentally different, as just totally different from us in some way, us versus them, to the extreme. And sometimes you lose sight of the fact that many people who found themselves in these situations were once like us, and they had the same aspirations for life and goals and dreams and ambitions, and the mental health problems derailed it. And so seeing that up close and personal with people that I actually knew really well and saw them before and after was a really powerful experience. But as an African American person, I had a tremendous stigma towards mental health problems personally, also in community. We would say things like, come on, psychiatrists are people who have money and free time to worry about, their relationship with their brother. We got real things to worry about. I'm trying to just survive. That was sort of the mentality. So psychiatrists often looked down upon in that very real way, but often to the detriment of many patients that I would see. And so as an African American person, I would see that, again, one of the few people in psychiatry, there were just so many patients who had so many things that they wanted to say and never really had a chance to. And I feel like I've been a vehicle for helping people sort of, overcome a lot of pain and trauma and things that they've experienced. So it was the last thing I ever thought I would do, but all those factors together kind of led me on that path. Yeah. I started enjoying this walk around thing.
You mentioned race, biology, and sociology. Can you
say that more time?
You mentioned race, biology, and sociology.
Uh-huh.
Can you in relation to both, how do you define it? Can you explain a little bit?
I was getting at with this whole race biology, sociology, was just more of the idea, you know, race, you know, what is race, right? I mean, is it something biological? Is it something, right? And so that's often how it can be framed, or how it was framed, right? It's like a genetic, biological, predeterminism, destiny sort of thing. But even when you say that, I mean, think about, like, when you say someone is, this is just like a thought experiment. When you say someone's Asian, you say someone's white, like, what does it actually even, you know, what does that mean, right? I mean, so like, for census purposes, someone from, you know, Norway and someone from Iraq are both white, but I mean, there's a lot of social and historical and cultural and all sorts of differences, right? So even, it's such a crude proxy in so many ways. But I guess what I was getting at was that, you know, there's a sense that it's often medicine is referred in a biological way, but it's really much more of a social kind of categorization. And that's really what I sort of had to uncover. And that wasn't, I mean, that's talk about Oakland, you hear it all the time now, but that in med school, in my period, that wasn't really something that was sort of conceptualized that way, at least not in the medical community. That's kind of what I was getting at. Hope that makes sense. Yeah. All these young minds, I know you must have questioned this. These young, bright minds.
You know, healthcare is really a long process and a journey. Was there a mentor along the way who kind of helped you believe that you could be who you are today?
There's several mentors. The question about mentors. Yeah, so I think there's a few sort of take-home points there as far as mentors. One is that when I would have things happen to me that seemed awful, one thing that I could sort of draw on was the strength of talking with other older faculty, African-American faculty in some ways who had worse experiences. In some ways it was like I was sort of building on, or standing on their shoulders and sort of inspiring me to kind of move forward. And so they really helped me in some ways. But I would encourage people to not just think in the box, saying, well, my mentor has to look the same way that I do, right? I think that's not something you should do. Because some of the best mentors that my wife is also African American in medicine. One of the best mentors she had in med school was a guy who was a white guy who'd been at Duke for a long time. And I guess at one point he decided that he really wanted to do more about women in medicine, specifically, and more specifically about minority women in medicine. And he had a lab, and he would always have minority women, you know, Asian, Black, women working in his lab. And he was a great mentor because his med school was really tough, and particularly a place like Duke, it was really harsh. And you know, you have some experience like this, and you think about, do I even want to do this? Am I going to quit? And so she took a leave of absence, and he really helped her through that and helped mentor her. So I think sometimes we don't want to limit it to, so I would say it's good to have people who can share your personal experiences, maybe from a racial or cultural standpoint, but you should never limit yourself to that only, and you should definitely look you know, more broadly than that. That's what I would say.
So in your book, you describe a lot of deep and meaningful relationships that you've made with your patients. How do you simultaneously have a professional relationship with them as well? In our class, we kind of, in a small group, we discussed our personal relationships with our doctors and how our relationships were drastically different to what you described, your relationships with your patients.
How were they different?
I guess personally, I don't have a good relationship with my doctor, and it was refreshing to read about specifically your relationship with Diane.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is, how do I sort of balance personal and professional? So I mean, you have to balance it, obviously, because you know, one challenge in medicine is that it's a difficult balance though, because you do get to come to care for people a lot, but if you wear every single thing that person has and gives to you, then it's gonna, you have to sort of also take care of yourself, and it can sort of collectively kind of wear on you. So you have to sort of be able to kind of understand and attach, but also be able to keep some distance and be able to sort of keep perspective as well. So it's a difficult challenge. I would say that there's probably some patients who probably, you said you don't have a good relationship with your doctor. I'm sure there's probably patients who would say that about me. But I like to think that many more would not say that. But yes, I think you got to strike that balance. It's really important. But it can be tough. It can really be tough. You know, I work with medical students. I work with medical students, and just yesterday we had a seminar where we were giving a seminar on how do you deal with like giving bad news to a patient. You know, someone is like had their spouse had a car accident, or someone is cancer or something like that. And it was one of the students had a really tough time with the session because I think she was just, you know, she had just had that experience with a patient where she was having to deliver news that this person had cancer. And I think, it takes time to learn how to sort of deal with that, but also take care of yourself emotionally. It can be a real challenge, and it's one of the things I like to help guide people through, because it's really important, because you don't want to just be cold and uncaring. Because I told the example of someone one time, a gentleman we knew from his scan that he had brain cancer, because he had seizures for the first time in his life in his 50s, and we did a scan, and he had brain cancer. Terrible news, right? He and his wife were there in the room, and the doctor, I was the young doctor at this point, brand new. The old doctor comes in, and he could tell he just didn't want to deal with it at all. And so he just kind of comes in and says, "Sir, there's something. We did a scan. It showed spots. It's bad." And he just walked out the room. I was like, "Wow." And then I'm the young doctor here. I think I can't believe it. And they're like, "What does that mean? What does it mean?" There's this man and his wife. What does it mean? And so I'm there. I just worked 30 straight hours and just getting ready to go home. Was the last person I could see. But I knew that I couldn't just leave it there, right? So I knew I had to sit there and just talk to this man and want to explain to him what this meant, what was going on. That doctor was so afraid of having any kind of connection that he just, so you can't be that kind of doctor either. You have to sort of strike that balance. It was a horrible sort of thing to sort of see and experience, and that really helped form. That's the kind of person I don't want to be. So when you have about mentors, there's people that you want to be like, but there's also, you see someone you say, there's people who do better, I'm not going to be that person. So it's really important to also know that as well when you're out there in the real world. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for your black man self, your black man psychiatrist self, and your psychiatrist self.
Three?
I do, because I see it. I think you're going to be a perfect resource for me, because I'm a faculty here at BC, and at BC's 150th anniversary, there was a church service at the Fenway. And they asked faculty to wear our full regalia. So I had all of my graduation gear, and I went to Penn, so my colors are blue and red. So it was it wasn't a dress, right? So it was very clear that it was my cap and gown. So I went up to a staff person and asked them where the faculty reception is after the ceremony. And he says, it's gonna be in this place, but it's only for faculty. And I'm just like, so it seemed that he had in his head faculty meant something that was not me, despite the fact that I had on these very significant markers of faculty. So for me, it spoke to how durable sort of stereotypes are. But that's the only sort of interpretation I had, because he could not perceive of me as faculty because, I guess from the neck up, it was not what it was supposed to be. And I assume that in some of the experiences that you discussed tonight, you're in your white medical gear, it's not a gown. What do you call that thing?
White coat.
White coat.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
No, I got to bottle up this morning. I'm tired. So that they see you in your full medical regalia, and it still doesn't resonate. So, your thoughts on it as you're sort of all of yourselves, how do you sort of think about how durable these stereotypes are?
Yeah, and they're durable in a lot of ways because I'm thinking about you as a woman, and so there's that aspect too, because my wife she comes in a white coat, and there was a patient that she had been seeing for some time, and then the patient made a complaint that a doctor hadn't seen a doctor. He'd been in the hospital 3 days, or whatever, hadn't seen a doctor yet. Of course she'd been seeing him, but so is that the issue of because a lot of times women in medicine will get that sort of perception of, you're not a doctor, you're whatever else, right? Something other than a doctor. And so that's when you said that story, I thought about my wife's experience with that. Sometimes those things are tremendously durable, right? And so it's like, for me, I have to learn to have to pick my battles, right? So I fight the battles when I feel like a patient is being harmed by someone's bias or ignorance. That's when I'm much more apt to sort of challenge. There are times in the book where I do not do that, and so and actually the honest truth is that I wrote those deliberately because in some ways I'm angry with that person, my former self, when I didn't do those things, but it also speaks to the power of not only durability, but also the power of hierarchy and how that often can silence us as well, because there were a couple of students, there was actually a young doctor, a young black woman who spoke out about some issues, and things sort of didn't go well after that happened. And so there was a sense from many of us that, gee, I worked so hard to get here. Can I just? am I going to down the vine right now in this case? And so there was that sort of a sense of being silent in some ways. But I really encourage students to speak out in different ways, particularly if you see someone that's being harmed. We can go more into that later. But back to your question, I mean, what do you do? I mean, I think it's very durable. I mean, how did you handle the situation? I guess I'm curious to know, what did you do? I'm putting you back on the spot. I'm sorry.
That's a good question. I don't even remember now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm curious because I want to know.
I mean, you know, the memory that I'm going to use as my response now is that what else do I need to signal faculty? I was like, I am faculty. I did say that. That's what I said. I said I'm faculty, and that was it. But I guess, my snarky response would be, what the hell else do I need? A sign across my forehead that says faculty. Everything else says faculty. I just said I'm faculty.
So maybe that's all you need to say. I'm faculty. Thank you very much. And then sort of maybe the best that you could do in that situation. Yeah, but it's certainly very durable. Those stereotypes are very enduring in many ways. Yeah.
And there's no mental health diagnosis for that kind of thing. I'm going to hold on to this truth despite the evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
No?
Jerk. Can you? Yeah, you didn't want my fancy formal, yeah, I don't know. I mean, but sometimes I often will see that as an opportunity because I feel like in some ways people are also, the society is, it sort of gears people to have you sort of think a certain way. What do you see? What do you see when you see black men? And it's sort of, black women. And so things so people are often just, in some ways we're all cursed by what's the prevailing narratives of society. We're all impacted by it. And so I try to be more forgiving of people and say, this is an opportunity that I can, maybe it's a gift that I have that I can sort of help maybe change someone's perspective. I sort of try to take a negative to a positive. Because otherwise I just sit around being angry all the time, and that's no good.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so clearly you're someone who cares about vulnerable people in our society, and I'm just wondering if you have any policy recommendations as far as healthcare reform, increased ease of access, anything on that front?
Great question. So about healthcare reform policy, yeah, we could have a whole discussion about that. So, here's the thing. You think about like the whole Affordable Care Act. I know it's sort of being recycled in the news again about what to do with that. There's all this. It's just what you see in practice is that patients are suffering irrespective of their race, religious beliefs, political beliefs, and somehow health reform has become politicized. It's been that way, and it's absurd. It's when you think about like states in the South and not expanding Medicaid and how in the abstract that may not mean much, but in the real world you see how people sort of fall through the cracks, continue to fall through the cracks in ways that they probably that they shouldn't or wouldn't. So I would say one thing I would say is there's still a lot that can be done local. Like there's always even if things are net, there's always local stuff that can be done from a policy standpoint. You start local and you just try move from there. For a long time I actually thought that I was going to be sort of hands-on, directly involved with that. And, I still may at some point, but I guess I've sort of, there's again it goes back to that idea. Even if there are things that are really bad in our society in terms of our structure, there's still a lot of good I can do as an individual and doctor. So that's sort of kind of how I try to move forward. I'm trying to think here. I almost want to play psychiatrist and ask you kind of like, why you asked that question and kind of what your thoughts were about policy, but I'll spare you. I was tempted to do that. But no.
How about one final question?
Oh, can it be a couple?
Oh, no. Okay, a couple. Two more questions.
Yeah.
Just want to say another thank you for talking, very insightful. I have kind of two questions. So the first one kind of goes back to that idea of the double consciousness that you're talking about, and I know you highlighted a lot of the the white points with it, but did you face any? I know you didn't detail any of the points of like the other things that you had difficulty with in cases of say family members saying that you wanted to be a doctor is can be more of a white ordeal or can be a little too pushy for you or whatever.
Okay.
And then my second question would be, I know you have to defend yourself sometimes, all the time, in terms of being towards the white side, but how
So great point. So what he's getting at is, you know, there's sort of the prejudice and stereotypes and bias you get from white people and other people in society. But then what do you see from black people as well, right? It's very real. So again, it goes back to the larger point that I consider like a poisonous narrative that has sort of infiltrated our whole society in so many ways. It affects everyone. So I think everyone is affected by this in different ways. And so there are cases where I'm, as a black doctor, black patients that are thinking that, you know, that somehow they're getting less in some way. It's been a long time since this happened, but when I was, 20 years ago, those things would come up, those kind of encounters would come up. There's one I detail in the book as well, where I just sort of describe that kind of experience. And growing up in Mass, I certainly had some of those experiences as well. Again, I think it just speaks to the larger narratives, and I think I've seen young black men sort of fall kind of victim to that, if you will, where they sort of allow those narratives, and so they shape, so they kind of want to live their life down toward that narrative that's already kind of been mapped out for them, right? So I totally see that. What did you ask them to do about it? Yeah. So, one thing is you have to kind of develop the sense that, there'll always be people. This is one thing you learn. There'll always going to be people who are going to, regardless of black, white, whatever, if you're trying to succeed, you're going to try and find ways to sort of limit that or denigrate that. There will always be those kind of people. You have to find a way to not, sort of find a way to separate yourself from that or not let that bring you down, because that's inevitable. There's always going to be some of that happens in society. I see it as a larger sort of poisonous narrative. There's a writer named Brian Stevenson. He wrote a really good book, Just Mercy. I got a chance to talk with him, and he just described how that's how big that narrative part is. How do we reshape the narrative? And that's like the biggest thing that we have to sort of do. We look at the media, look at news reports. If you see black men, you always see them, and you always see us in the same sort of way. There's so many black people who are living very normal, reasonable, normal, average lives. But the narrative is always filtered to a certain way, and you got to think about how does that poison everybody. So when I even encounter people, how are they? Everyone's impacted by that, right? And we'd be remiss thinking that we aren't. And so you have to just sort of. So I don't take it personal. Because you have to we can stop taking it personal and sort of realize that there's other factors, not about you, but about how they're shaped, and you have to sort of not let that weigh you down. Because if it weighs you down, then you sort of maybe find yourself in that same place. That's how I look at it. You had a question, man. I know maybe one more. Maybe we'll figure it out. Yes. No question. And then one back there.
Something that struck me that you said was like you didn't like the words on your site, like areas like those. What you had the worst score on ended up being your field. And so a lot of times I'm saying like everybody has a gift or like a talent. Stick with what you know, what you're good at. So like how do you fight against that?
Yeah. Well, I think one lesson for the issue is I had the worst grade in psychiatry of anyone. So one thing is that you never know where you're going to end up. You got to kind of keep a little bit open mind. It's one of those lessons in life because you really never know where you're going to end up. I think it was me. It was just there's gift, but it's also like a work. And so I felt like I think I really took the heart when that person told me that I was so bad that I wasn't fit to see patients, and that really made me sort of rethink. What was I doing? What could I do better? And actually, the more I sort of opened myself up to that, I went to med school with the very much the biomedical, not really caring about the person sort of thing. Once I sort of opened myself up to see how important, how valuable it was just to sort of be able to have someone sort of tell you their story and sort of see them through the worst parts of life and see them get better. It just became a sort of like a transformation for me. And so I just sort of saw my place very differently. So that was it. But you never really know. I know there's one more question and I'll shut up. And everyone just thanks for your patience. Yes.
Thank you so much. So you touched a little bit earlier in your talk about meeting people where they are and how, especially right now in our country, politically as well, conversations like this around race and social issues are so explosive. And I know, like for me personally, in like my own communities, my own family, I know people who do hold these kind of very entrenched views and just like they don't want to go there. They don't want to have that conversation, they want to brush it off. So I'm just curious, like, what's your perspective on maybe trying to open that up a little bit? Like, how do you meet people where they're like, how do you start to have those conversations with people who just like don't kind of want to open that Pandora's box?
Yeah, so that Brian Stevenson guy I mentioned again, he also described how there's a sense of trying to be comfortable with the uncomfortable and sort of recognizing that you're going to be, there's a certain level of, like even in this room, some of you, like, you know, for me to just come here and talk, and then for this to be ended, I mean, that also is no good. I mean, the only real value is that you and folks after this, and moving forward, talk with each other, and sort of have these kind of real conversations. I think it starts there before you can sort of start standing out. Because I mean, there's all, but you have to have the conversation in a way. I think we're so quick to sort of just want to condemn people individually. And again, I still see this much broader. You know, everyone is this poison in their own sort of way. And so if we just keep going back to individuals, you good, you bad, we're never going to have we're never going to get anywhere. If we just continue to sort of frame that individual, I'm a good person, you're a bad person, sort of thing. You have to be able to sort of enter into a conversation without that framework and just talk. I mean, so there's all sorts of things that you folks do who, you know, you probably have never even had a chance to talk about. So hopefully there's something I brought up here that will stimulate something that you can talk about in your own life, and you guys can have a conversation about these issues. You can start there, and then just start to go from there. Without that, it's never gonna get better. It's only gonna get worse. You just get in your Twitter account or whatever and just start saying stuff. I mean, it's never gonna get better if you don't have real conversations with real people. So hopefully this will just be the beginning of something, not just the end of me coming. So thank you.